welcome you to the first meeting of 2022 and of the public hearing for the City of Tampa's Historic Preservation Commission. I am Vivian Solaga, the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission, and I would like to introduce or have our commissioners introduce themselves, beginning on my right.
Commissioner Carrie-Ann Canch.
Susan Swift, planner with Colliers Engineering and Design.
I think we're going to have to speak up. And your microphone is not turned on. There you go.
It's on.
Oh, there it's on.
Carrie-Ann Canch.
Susan Swift with Colliers Engineering and Design, planner.
Dominique Cobb.
Tom Pluckon, professor of anthropology at USF.
Also present with us today are staff.
Excuse me, Madam Commissioner, can you, your microphone is not on. It's on now.
Also present with us today is our staff, Elaine Munn, Dennis Fernandez, and our legal representation, Camaria Pettis-Mackel. Oh, Aminta. I didn't recognize her behind that mask. Pursuant to our agenda, we have the next is the acceptance of our meeting minutes from Tuesday, December 21st, our last meeting. Is there any comment or correction to be made regarding those minutes? If not, may I have a motion to accept as presented? And a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Announcements, Dennis, if you would, please.
Sure. Good morning, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architectural Review and Historic Preservation Manager. Welcome to our first meeting of the year. Just a couple of brief announcements. First of all, if you haven't already added the dates to your schedule, the 2022 HPC Commission schedule is in your packets. If you'd like an electronic version of that, let us know. We will send you one. But those dates in both blue and green should be notated on your personal calendars as potential hearing dates. Of course, sometimes they have to be adjusted depending on issues and application schedules. I did want to let you know that you do have a new parking pass in your packets. If you parked in Fort Brooke this morning, you may have noticed a new parking system. So if you need any coaching on that, please let me know, and I will help you through it. But it's very similar to the previous system that was in place. With that, I think we are ready to move to conflicts of interest and ex parte communication, and our legal counsel will lead that discussion.
Good morning, Commissioners. Camaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. Will the Commissioners please state whether or not they have any conflicts of interest regarding the items that are on the agenda this morning? Hearing none for the record. Additionally, will the Commissioners please state whether or not they've had any ex parte communication regarding any of the items on the agenda? Thank you so much. And just as a reminder, with us all wearing our mask, if you could try as hard as possible to speak loudly into the microphone, because obviously the mask creates an additional barrier. So I'm sure our IT department would appreciate us trying to speak as loud as possible. Thank you so much.
And with that, we will have the swear-in. Anyone in the public, including staff, that's going to be providing testimony, please stand and raise your right hand.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm any testimony you will be given today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. And with that, we are ready for our first case. which is the Stovall House Local Historic Landmark Designation, and Elaine will lead that presentation.
Good morning, Commissioners. Elaine Lund, Historic Preservation Staff. This item is denostated as the Stovall House. It's located at 4621 Bayshore Boulevard in Tampa. We're looking at it today for consideration for recommendation for local historic landmark designation. The Stovall House was constructed in 1909, and it sits fairly far south out of what was the city of Tampa at that time, down Bayshore Boulevard. It was constructed in the Nix subdivision, as it was known at the time. And originally, as constructed, the house sat on about 18 acres of property off the bay. The original owners, the Truesdale family, had an interest in poultry farming. And you can see here on this early Sanborn map, all the little yellow, that indicate wood frame structures, and the dashed lines show that they were open air. So these were all the poultry houses that Mrs. Truesdale used to house her chickens. She was a competitive poultry raiser and a big advocate and judge at the Florida State Fair. The red line on the map indicates the current boundaries of the Stovall House property, and you can see in the center of that the Stovall House as it stood then. The 1931 Sanborn map indicates just the area that is in red there, that is the present property today. The remainder of the property had been subdivided and sold off by the Truesdales before it was purchased by Wallace S. Stovall in 1915. Excuse me. The Sanborn maps give us a lot of information about the buildings there. And you can see that the house is shown primarily in yellow, which means that it was constructed from wood. And then the red outline around the exterior wall of the house and the little notation that says VEN''D means that it's veneered in brick. The D on the house indicates that it's a dwelling. There's a 2 showing that it's 2 stories. And the dashed line going all the way around the house in yellow indicates the open porch that surrounded the house. There are also a couple of outbuildings shown, both constructed out of wood. There's a little bit of blue on one of them. There, the further one to the south, showing that it was veneered in concrete block, and then the adjacent structure veneered in brick. So this is the present day aerial map of the property with the Stovall House shown in the middle of the property. There have been several improvements to the site, which we will see more about in a bit here. So as I noted, the Stovall House was constructed in 1909 as the home of Logan and Florence Truesdale. Mr. Truesdale was a sales manager for the Florida Brewing Company. Originally, he moved here as the representative sales rep for the Chattanooga Brewing Company, but soon thereafter became the manager for the local brewery. The Truesdales were very active in high society, and Mrs. Truesdale worked closely with Tampa architect Francis J. Kennard to design a house that met their entertaining needs. And the building was constructed in the neoclassical style. By 1915, the Truesdales had moved on. They maintained the residence for a couple of years and rented it out to some very notable families, but they were able to sell it in 1915 to Wallace Stovall. Wallace Stovall was a newspaper man, the founder and editor and publisher of the Tampa Tribune. Mr. Stovall did end up selling off the Tribune to other interests, but he stayed on as the editor and publisher for quite a time. And this photo shows the house in about 1925 when it was under Mr. Stovall's ownership. Wallace Stovall was also interested in real estate, and once he became less involved in the newspaper and he became a little more involved in real estate, constructing some of the buildings that were to make make up a strong component of Tampa's downtown skyline. On the left here, you see a page from the newspaper from 1926. This is actually the competitive paper, the Tampa Daily Times, showing the Staval Professional Building as it was just finished, when it just finished construction. And then on the right, the Stovall Office Building from about 1945. There were other buildings around downtown Tampa that bared the Stovall name, such as I believe there was a Stovall F building and also just another Stovall office building. These buildings have been either demolished or dramatically changed over the years. So the main structure standing that represents Stovall and his contributions to the city of Tampa is the Stovall House on Bayshore. So the Stovall House, you can see it here in 1973 and then again in 1981 on the right. The Stovall House was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1974. So this picture on the left is from its 1970s listing nomination into the National Register of Historic Places. The property underwent changes, a few changes with the next series of owners, and in 1979, some alterations were made, which unfortunately included the removal of the roof and the columns of the veranda, or the one-story porch around the front of the house. This was largely due to termite damage. The columns were reused in another portion of the property, but the house did maintain its neoclassical form, including the colossal columns, the strong pediment over the two-story entryway, and the oculus in that pediment. These are present-day pictures of the Stovall House. Looking at it from the south and east, and then from the north and east. Moving around the sides of the Stovall House, we see it from the north and west sides, from the south and west sides, and then the rear, the photo on the right there. And just so you have an idea of where these pictures were taken on the property, it's just a photo key showing you the different angles of the pictures there. Give you a better idea of what you're looking at. There are other buildings on the property, one being the greenhouse, which had been previously constructed under a different owner, than the one now. And the greenhouse was relocated as part of the current work done to the property, so it now sits in the front of the property, but does not obscure the Stovall House from view. The other buildings on the property now include the Orangery, which is a sort of a restaurant, and a guest house toward the rear of the property. And then this is a photo key showing you the locations and angles of these pictures. The current owners, Staval House LLC, purchased this property for use as a private club. They purchased it from a long-term owner, Mr. Harry Teasley, who owned the house in 1991. Mr. Teasley was a very good steward of the property and did some, meticulously maintain the house. So when the Stovall House LLC was able to purchase the property for its use. There was some rehabilitation work necessary to bring the house up to code for its new purpose. However, for the most part, the house was in excellent condition. These are just some shots showing you the exterior, the north porch, this is the south porch on the left, and the entrance into the house from the porte-cochere, and then that entry space once you come in through that door. The interior of the house, the former living room on the left, and then the grand staircase that takes you up to the second story. The windows in the house remain the original windows, and the fireplace retains its historic trim with the ionic columns that are similar to the ones out front. You can see in the middle picture there, if you look closely, that this is one of the original wood double hung windows. You can see the chain for the sash used to raise and lower the windows. So the Stovall House is significant for its association with Wallace F. Stovall, the founder and longtime publisher of the Tampa Tribune. He lived there for 30 years, during which time he remained the publisher of the Tampa Tribune and worked to be a progressive booster of Tampa, constructed some of the best-known buildings that contributed to the skyline downtown. And this house remains the best representation of Stovall's life and contribution to the city of Tampa. It was constructed in the neoclassical style, and despite its alterations, it still remains an excellent example of this style. The Stovall House was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1974. It's significant in the area of communications under National Register Criterion B, and in the area of architecture under National Register Criterion C. The building was constructed and achieved its significance during the period of historic significance as established in the nomination pursuant to these guidelines. Therefore, the Stovall House meets the requirements of the City of Tampa Code of Ordinances, Section 27-257 for landmark designation. And these sections are called out for you in the presentation here. Section 27-257A1 is the requirement for the date of construction. It was constructed circa 1909. Section 27-257A2 lists the significance criteria that we look at. So it was under A22, the National Register Criterion B. It was significant of the home of Wallace F. Stovall. And under A23, or also known as National Register Criterion C, it's significant for being an excellent example of the neoclassical style. Section 27-257C requires that this commission consider whether the owner supports the designation, and we do have an application that the owner submitted for landmark designation. Staff's recommendation today is that the Stovall House at 4621 Bayshore Boulevard meets the criteria for designation found in the City of Tampa Code of Ordinances, and that it should be recommended to City Council for local historic landmark designation. At this time, the representatives for the property owner are here, and I would like to ask them to come forward to add any additional comments.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Tyler Hudson. I'm an attorney with the law firm Gardner Brewer Hudson, and my address is 400 North Ashley Drive. I'd like to thank Elaine, Dennis, Ron, Beverly, everyone for their work on this project. This actually started back in 2018, even as early as 2017, which time has gone by quite quickly. Fortunately, this is much more of a architecture-driven process than a legally driven process. And so mercifully, I'm going to pass things over to Saul Fleischman of Fleischman Garcia, who's the project architect who brought this to life. I'm happy to answer any questions you have after Saul's presentation. Thanks.
Good morning. Saul Fleischman, Fleischman Garcia Architecture, 324 Hyde Park Avenue. Thank you. I was the architect of record for the Stovall House, a very special project for the city of Tampa and me personally. And I'll show you some aerial photos that really tell the story. If we can get this to work. Great. So, fortunately, we didn't have to do much to the historic structure. The city of Tampa mandated that we install a fire sprinkler system, which we did very sensitively. And as far as the exterior is concerned, we removed some non-original planters, some steps. We removed a family room that had been added on years ago that was not contributing. And there was some openings that went into the family room from the butler's pantry, the former kitchen, that we put a new window and a new door. So fortunately, we didn't touch the front or the sides that were visible from Bayshore. So any rehabilitation was very minor. One of the most important things is we respected the historic structure by locating the additions in a way to kind of frame the house. Can you see? We arranged it with a central axis and have a linear water feature, and we moved the greenhouse, which was purchased in the 1980s by Harry Teasley in England and had shipped over, and he had it assembled, and it was originally back here on the property, and it was really a tour de force. We lifted it up on wheels and moved it to the front and put it down. No damage. It's just an amazing feature on Bayshore Boulevard. Anyway, I'm here to answer any questions. It's a very special house, and it certainly deserves landmarking.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak to this issue? If not, we will close the public hearing. And commissioners, if you have any questions or comments or remarks to address to the applicant, please do so. I had one question and one comment. The landmarking is specifically only for the historic house and not the entire property? Is that what we're looking at here?
Hi, Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager. In accordance to code, landmark structure designation must include its site. So although the entire site will be landmarked, only the historic structure will be contributing to the site. So if, for instance, in the future, someone wanted to construct a building in front of the Stovall house, that would have to go through a review process with the Architecture Review Commission. If it was just the structure, just the physical boundaries of the structure, then what's occurring around it wouldn't have any type of oversight. So I think it's an appropriate approach to the long-term preservation and planning of the site.
And that should be so stated when the motion is made for the property, or is that simply understood?
Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. I think if you focus just on how it's before the board, you will be fine, because that's a separate process, as Mr. Fernandez just stated.
Okay.
But if you just, depending on how the board wants to make a motion, your motion will encompass the matter that's before it.
And I will just add that the designation report that you have before you, there's a legal description within that report, and that legal description is the entire boundary of the property.
Good.
I have a follow-up to that. So where will it say what you indicated, Mr. Fernandez, that if somebody is gonna change the new building, the newer buildings, that those won't go through the process, or if somebody does something in front of, what if in some other way it affects it or is perceived to affect the historic building? Where will it say that? In the adopting ordinance?
Correct. Within the ordinance, it will place the property's regulation and oversight before the Architecture Review Commission. That's in the ordinance, and it's within the code as well. So that's common to any property that this commission recommends for designation, is that ultimately it would go under the jurisdiction of either the Architecture Review Commission or the Barrio Latino Commission, depending on its location.
Well, my question is that I think this is maybe not unique, but not common, that it sounds to me like you said, this building and the impacts on the older building will be reviewed, and because it's contributing, but that other changes won't be, even though the entire site is. So I'm also trying to figure out how this will actually be implemented, because it's not clear if the whole site is, which I understand why it is, but where will it say that an improvement to the, somebody wants to swap out all the windows of the non-contributing structure won't have to come before us, or vice versa?
ARC, actually.
I mean, before the ARC, not me. Yes.
I mean, within the designation report, and specifically on page 4, it will call out the number of contributing and non-contributing buildings. All structures within a designated site are reviewed regardless if they're contributing or non-contributing. However, contributing buildings are those that fall under the higher degree of regulatory effect through a local designation, in that they have to be maintained for preservation purposes. New construction or non-contributing structures can be demolished and modified more liberally, as long as they don't adversely affect the historic character of the contributing building. And that's one element that you will need to specify upon motion making, is that the guiding principles for this particular property will be the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties, because that becomes essentially the rule book for determining appropriate approaches to preservation and new construction of the site. It's a little different than a historic district where you have a set of design guidelines. For landmark structures, we rely upon the Secretary of the Interior standards.
I would also just simply like to point out that under the criteria B, in addition to the owner of the original structure and his importance in the city of Tampa, the architect was also an extraordinarily important person in the early history of Tampa, and has done a number of significant structures still remaining throughout the city, Francis Kennard, and we'd also, I think, like to make that point as part of the substantiation for its historic recognition. Are there any other comments or questions?
Yeah. So I have a question regarding the house itself, and whether the changes on it affected the contributing factors of the house, like the brick being covered over and stuccoed over, and then the porch being removed. So how much of that would affect the actual contributing architectural aspects of the house?
Well, I think Elaine and I discussed this quite a bit, because it has been a while since the house was evaluated by, for the National Register. But given the scarcity of these type of grand homes along Bayshore, and the fact that the architectural style is still clearly identifiable, although there have been changes, there were variations on that style that did not include verandas or did included different types of exterior envelopes of the buildings. We feel particularly that this is a local historic designation, that the building does meet the criteria that's specified within the code.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I, for one, would like to applaud the owner and the team here representing the owner for making this move to landmark this structure. It's extremely important, I think, to maintain what structures, residential structures there are left on Bayshore Boulevard, regardless of whether they are in the Hyde Park district or not. And I applaud your effort in this, and I support your application for landmark status. And if there are no other comments or remarks from the commissioners, may I ask for a motion? Someone want to make a stab at that?
I can give it a try. I move to recommend that City Council approve HPC 2021-05 for the property located at 4621 Bayshore Boulevard for local historic landmark designation. Do we need the numbers of the?
I'm sorry?
Do we need the numbers of the? Under City of Tampa Code of Ordinance Section 27-257, A2 for its association with, no, is it A2?
It's right here at the bottom.
Well, that's the, do we need the local ordinance or the National Register criteria?
You have to do a combination of both.
Okay. Under National Register Criterion B and C and City of Tampa Code of Ordinance Section 27-257, Part A2, 2, am I right?
A1
Two.
and 2.
And A2, 3.
Good job. Really.
Is there a second to that motion?
I second that motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Congratulations. And good luck in the remainder of the construction work over there.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, the next item on the agenda is an update on the expansion of the Hyde Park Local Historic District.
Good morning once again, Commissioners. Dennis Fernandez, Architecture Review and Historic Preservation Manager. This has been an item that has been being periodically updated for your information to demonstrate the progress and eligibility of two applications that we received to consider expansion of the Hyde Park Local Historic District. And I believe we wanted to begin with a PowerPoint to orient you. If we can bring that up. I'm not seeing that.
Not yet. There we
There we
go.
go. All right. Thought I had. It's on now. All right. Make sure this is working. Yep, okay. So once again, there is a proposal to expand the established Hyde Park Local Historic District. And this presentation has a goal of sort of bringing you up to date and giving us some next steps that need to occur if the commission feels appropriate to do so. So as a refresher, the current boundaries of the Hyde Park Historic District are indicated on the map. This is a map that we use several times each day in our office as a guidance of both boundary lines and contributing and non-contributing status of structures within the boundaries. Those structures within the red line that are indicated on the map are subject to review by the local historic district. The boundaries of the blue line indicate the boundaries of the National Register Historic District, which predated the local historic district by 3 years. The existing district has obviously both contributing and non-contributing structures within it, those that are historic and those that are essentially either new construction outside the period of historic significance or have been altered to a point where they no longer reflect their historic character. There are 834 contributing structures and 389 non-contributing structures within the local boundaries. Under Section 256, the process is delineated and the steps that need to occur to both establish and expand a local historic district. It's obviously very weighted towards the initiation of the designation, which requires a significant amount of research and outreach, and we've been somewhat living in that world for about a year now with the different steps that need to occur during that phase. There are several neighborhood associations within the local historic district. The two that have submitted applications for consideration of the expansion are the Historic Hyde Park Neighborhood Association and the Hyde Park Spanish Town Creek Civic Association. And staff has been engaged with both those associations on both outreach efforts and attending association meetings to answer questions and provide information. And we did speak to both association presidents yesterday just to let them know we were going to be discussing this topic today. The study area that we've been focusing in on as a staff has been mainly the boundaries of the National Register District that actually extends beyond the protective boundaries of the local historic district. And because those boundaries have been in place since the 1980s, and these areas have been subject to tremendous amounts of redevelopment during that period, you're going to see some dramatic changes in the numbers that originally constituted the district contributing resources. And that's one of the reasons for discussion today, is that these areas are being located in South Tampa in proximity to these very desirable neighborhoods are under a tremendous amount of pressure for redevelopment, which was one of the main reasons that the neighborhoods felt that the protective measures of the local historic district are warranted. So during the 1931 Sanborn map here, which predated obviously the introduction of the Leroy Selman Crosstown Expressway, you see the neighborhood much in the same composition that we enjoy the Hyde Park neighborhood today. consisting of mainly a mixture of residential and commercial structures, most of which were built either at the late 19th or early 20th century in a variation of architectural styles of the period. You see mainly composed of wood frame construction, but dotted mainly for the commercial buildings with either brick or concrete block construction. Some of the area obviously was impacted by the introduction of the Crosstown Expressway, which impacted its grid system as well. This is a working map of the original inventory. There was different categories of structures, both contributing, non-contributing. There was also a contributing altered category, which eventually was absorbed into the contributing. That's obviously, it's important to have definitive classifications when you're dealing with historic preservation and the regulatory effect of local historic districts. But you see, 1985, there were 239 contributing and 103 non-contributing within the study area, so beyond the local boundaries into the national register boundary. And that did extend all the way up to Kennedy Boulevard. Just wanted to provide you a selection of some of the houses that are within the area, both contributing and non-contributing, just to give you a little bit more of a flavor of the architectural styles. If this progresses to a formal recommendation hearing, we'll provide you a deeper reach on this information, but this is just for you to get an overview today. You can see that the structures range from, very significant to somewhat modest. The area constituted a area of the city that had a number of very influential and affluent families that had residences and businesses, to modest homes that composed the area of Dobyville as well, portion of Dobyville. See the different types of buildings within the study area. These south of the crosstown, dealing with commercial buildings, and then various residential cottages and bungalows. Some of the newer construction that's been introduced over the years. The area, one of the reasons that the area is under such tremendous development pressure is that the underlying zoning accommodates multifamily uses, which is a disincentive to preservation in that single-family structures are sitting on parcels with a higher type of development potential, and ultimately can be detrimental to their existence. These are some of the structures that are north of the crosstown. That area has intensified, I'm sure we're all aware of that, over the years into more of a commercial thoroughfare. So some of the structures have been adaptively reused for offices. Many have been demolished or altered beyond significance. So if we look at the same area, we see now, including the entire study area, the contributing structures are about 40%, which is 114 is that number, versus the non-contributing structures, which are at 171. So that percentage has somewhat flipped from a contributing advantage to a non-contributing. Some of the green structures indicated on your map have been designated as local historic landmarks. That's why they're indicated as green, so they would already have protection under those ordinances. So breaking the area down into somewhat of manageable segments, we wanted to provide you some of the percentages as you consider boundary options. And we have obviously sort of a recommendation on that at the appropriate time for discussion. But you see the segment above the crosstown, if you isolate that, the parcels have somewhat been combined in that area. So while the property itself may constitute a single classification, could be several parcels that are composed that particular calculation. So, you know, we see 23 contributing structures and 34. However, you can see some of the size of the structures, you know, just indicated on the map footprints. Moving south of the crosstown, with the crosstown as sort of as a northern and western boundary. You see in the green area, the shaded area, which is probably the highest in content and number. There's a 42% contributing calculation, 90 contributing and 126 non-contributing. As we move towards the east, once we get to Hyde Park Avenue, we noticed a significant diminishment in contributing buildings. You know, there's just one contributing building in there. Most of that historically didn't have a lot of density, was sort of supportive to the proximity to the river, and it has primarily had been vacant land or non-contributing structures, even in the prior National Register nomination. So we felt that that was an area that maybe needed somewhat special consideration, being that it lacks really any historic contribution to the district. So just dealing with some of the data, we see the existing Hyde Park Historic District, which I had summarized earlier, is composed of the 1,223 structures with a 68% contributing status. If we look at just the green area, which has the higher degree of contributing status as an expansion area, then the revised total combined number of contributing structure goes to 934. The non-contributing number would be 515 with a 64% total, which is still very impressive for a historic district. Usually if you're getting above 60% contributing structures, that's you know, the threshold that is considered to be substantial. Of course, those numbers, if you determine that, you know, perhaps the other areas would be involved, that would affect those numbers, and obviously in this instance bring that percentage down. So since we last met in September, we attended a neighborhood meeting at the Kate Jackson Park. There's about 40 to 45 residents of this area who participated in that discussion. We gave sort of a similar presentation, a little bit more focused on, you know, what it means to be, you know, to be a property owner in a historic district as well. So that was well attended. We've been working on the mapping and the data calculations since then through the holidays in order to have this on the agenda for your consideration today. And essentially the staff feels at this time that we've done adequate amount of outreach and answering questions, and that the next appropriate step would be to notice this formally under the code to the area, to an area within the subject area, and consider a recommendation to City Council for an expansion if you so deem appropriate. The recommendation hearing by the Historic Preservation Commission is a required component of the designation process. It is a publicly noticed process, so we would be sending out letters to individuals within both the study area and the local historic district, indicating that a potential change to the boundaries is going to be discussed, and we would be posting signs throughout the neighborhood as well. I do want to leave some room within the time frame to accommodate another public meeting, because once we send out those letters, we'll get a higher degree of engagement based on that activity. So with that said, I think, you know, a meeting within, you know, at least 60 to 90 days out would be appropriate. If the commission determines that it wishes to recommend expansion, then it would place in motion the other requirements of that, which would be a recommendation by the Hillsborough County City County Planning Commission, as well as 2 hearings before City Council, all of which would be noticed. So for today's discussion, we kind of wanted to give you a couple of things to focus on. One would be a preferred boundary option. That would help us in focusing in our efforts on any additional outreach and, of course, noticing that we would need to do. And then the second part of that discussion would be determining an appropriate date and time for the hearing for a formal recommendation to City Council. That concludes my overview, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
Dennis, is there a percentage of historic concentration below which National Park Service or maybe Chapter 27 would not consider, or that it might lose its historic district status?
You know, that's a difficult question to answer, because often it's not just quantity, it's quality that is considered. I would say generally, you know, looking at historic districts that are similar to Hyde Park, you know, you're going to see 55 to 60% as the number that they usually fall within. You know, most of the districts in our city, fortunately, are above 60%. If we were going to, you know, somewhat add a number of structures that would bring, you know, the percentage to below 50% or below 60%, excuse me, I would be cautious about that. But the code doesn't specify a particular threshold.
Okay. Commissioners, any comments or questions on this presentation? Please.
I have a question. Are there, in any of these 3 areas, are there any National Register or local landmarks that have already been designated or that we think might be worthy?
So south of the crosstown, we have the Stovall Bakery Building, which is the structure there, sort of the green structures in the center of the slide. And then to the upper right-hand corner of the light green shading, that is also a local landmark, is the Peter O'Knight Cottage.
Oh.
Oh, right.
Okay.
So those two are locally landmarked. The entire area is in the National Register district. I don't recall any individually
I didn't.
listed, but you know, the district itself is listed. Now, one thing we were, you know, I want to kind of stress is, you know, if we chose a path during your discussion that we, you know, perhaps focused on only a segment or segments of what we have highlighted here, doesn't mean that we can't try to create another vehicle by which those properties are protected. So we could look at perhaps doing a multiple properties designation. You know, there's some very significant properties across from the University of Tampa campus on Kennedy Boulevard that are, you know, would all qualify for local landmark designation. Just a matter of, putting efforts and getting the support of the owners for that.
Okay, that's good to know.
Now, in the purple area, the buildings that are colored blue are new construction. It's just there are more than 9 other buildings in that little circle. So,
There's a recent construction, according to the property appraiser's office. There's other non-contributing structures in there, but there's only, there's, apartment complexes with dozens and dozens of residences in
Right.
there. They're, 8 stories tall. It doesn't capture that within the map, but there's only one contributing building. There's a Publix in that area. There's some commercial businesses.
Which is the
speak
contributing?
into the microphone.
Which is the contributing in the purple area?
It's right in the center. It's a previous resident
Okay.
that's, I believe, now on the St. John's Episcopal campus.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Dennis. And we'll look forward to seeing how this progresses into the next phases of its development.
So just from a procedural standpoint, we are looking for a motion at today's hearing to establish when we would be bringing this back to you for formal recommendation. So if you don't mind, I have a couple options for you to talk about.
Okay.
First of all, I'll say that for these types of meetings, I've found through past experience that we can get a larger number of people attending, more engagement by doing them in the evening as opposed to 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. So I believe that doing an evening meeting for this particular subject would be the most appropriate and most effective way of engaging the neighborhood. Secondly, I think a couple possible dates that we already have the room secured, which is important for having these meetings, would be March 15th or April the 12th. We could look at May. That's starting to be quite a ways out, but I originally I had March targeted, but with the recent health situation that we're in, I think it's a little unpredictable, with that date still. And for a in-person meeting without a virtual component, which is what we are able to provide, I think it's important to have a level of comfort about the environment as well. So I think any of those, the March, the April, or the May dates, I think are all viable dates. We would just want to be able to identify which date it is so that we can properly plan noticing, because it's going to be a very large and costly process to notice these areas for the staff. Any preferences to those dates? I know there's spring break and whatnot in there in March. Sometimes that can affect availability.
And while I'm looking up that,
I'm thinking 5:30 p.m. Would be the time. So that would give enough time. That's what we're starting our ARC meetings at now. Seems to be working.
and are you also looking for a preference from us on which area, or?
I would. I think what I'm looking for is if you're feeling that an area definitely would not be part of the discussion, to let us know that now, because it would affect how we notice. We have to notice 250 feet from our boundary line. So obviously, if we're talking about the crosstown as a boundary line, that's going to be very different than talking about Kennedy Boulevard as a boundary line.
And do you notice individually just this area or the entire existing district as well?
The entire existing district.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Plus this area.
I'm good with both dates. I just wanted to check Passover and Easter.
I-
Yeah, I think
either
all the
date-
dates are fine.
I beg pardon?
I think all the dates are fine with me so far.
I mean, either date would
Okay.
work. I guess I'm just recalling your hesitancy that March might be too soon for an in-person meeting based on the COVID.
I don't know. I'm just kind of going with where we are today. It's a large undertaking to notice. I think, if I was going to make a recommendation, it would be April meeting, I think would work well. We may have to have a couple meetings in a row. We might have to still have one in March and then have one in April, but to accommodate other business that we have. But we could dedicate April to solely this topic, because I'm sure you're going to have a number of individuals present for public comment at that meeting.
All right, is that good with everyone here?
Yes.
Yep.
So if you.
So April it is.
Yeah, if you do believe that, we would want a motion.
And we
just-
need a motion.
Yeah, just to notice, publicly notice for that date.
I make a motion that the April 12th, 2022 reserve meeting date we use for the, the action items of the boundaries for the Hyde Park district.
Second?
Second.
Thank you.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign? Motion passes.
And for that meeting, just so the staff can have an understanding of what the desire of the board is, did you have any preference on boundaries at this time? We obviously can't, this is just a discussion, we can't determine boundaries because this is not a noticed hearing in that capacity, but we can certainly have an understanding of what area we'll be targeting at the April hearing.
So my understanding is overall, you're trying to match up the local designation with the national, right?
I don't believe, we're responding to applications that were submitted by the neighborhood
In those
association to
areas.
expand the district. In conversations with those neighborhood leaders, I don't believe that they anticipate expanding beyond the crosstown. There's different opinions on where that northern boundary should be. I think, at a certain point, we're gonna become empirical and look at what makes the most sense planning-wise and preservation-wise. But I think everyone understands that the area north of the crosstown has been highly impacted through very intensive redevelopment.
And that's the one with the zoning, the more mixed zoning.
Well, as you get north of the crosstown, you get away from even residential type zoning, you get more into commercial and planned development zoning categories. Large institutional zonings like the university and Tampa General Hospital own, large segments of land in there. So it's a different vehicle. I think, in the 1980s, it would have made tremendous sense to include this in the local district. There were obviously reasons, I can surmise what they were, but I wasn't there for that. So, they didn't include that area in there. It's only gotten more intense and less populated with historic structures since then. So, in my opinion, that area would be more appropriate for a multiple properties listing and not inclusion into a local historic district where it's probably not practical to make that leap at this time.
And
Okay.
the same comment then would be true about the purple area as well. Right?
I think part of this is practical approaches on how you justify expansion of a district. And when you're in areas that, really lack any contributing structures, your argument somewhat is undermined. I think, if we're looking, which we will talk more about in April, is about, why should this happen? Why should a district be expanded? Obviously one component is the preservation of historic structures, but the other component is, a need to provide somewhat of a protective area around the periphery of a local historic district as well, where you don't have, adverse impacts happening by proximity because someone can build a very intense structure across the street. We've already seen this area developed out. It's pretty much developed out to most of its potential. So that effect is pretty much in place. Frankly, I don't see this area contributing a lot to the Hyde Park Historic District at this time,
The purple.
Right.
the purple area.
Right.
Yeah. Do you have any inkling if the owner of the single contributing structure would even support this? I mean, that would.
I can tell you they won't, because,
Yeah.
they've asked for demolition in the
Yeah.
past. It's a matter of, that's a educational facility campus, and I think they're gonna redevelop it. They sort of have, a holder on it right now that they're still operating, but they haven't really redeveloped it yet.
Right. It seems in terms of like the overall integrity of the setting of the district, that the area in green is really, contributes to the setting of the district as a whole. I'm not sure about the purple or the yellow.
I actually would like to consider the yellow because I do believe that is where Dobyville is situated, correct?
Part of Dobyville, it would be, really just a tiny piece of it, because the Willow is really the eastern border, and Willow would be the line to the street to the furthest to the left. So you're just getting a tiny segment. You actually have a larger portion of Dobyville within the green,
Yeah.
which would be the crosstown all the way down to Swan, some of which is already in the district.
Okay. And if the, because we're still over the 60%, but if that, because I want to make sure also you encompass that green area you spoke about before. I know it's just an individual contributing factor, but I do think it should, well, those residents should have a option to voice their opinion, and if you leave it out today, they won't get that notice, correct?
Well, we would notice, we'll have to run the radius of the notice with the addresses, but we would notice 250 feet out from the boundary line. So some of those areas in the green, or in the yellow and the purple will get noticed, just by proximity to the boundary.
But and just so that I'm clear, but without the recommendation of that yellow area today, it would be left out and move forward with just the green and maybe the purple.
Yes, we wouldn't do the entire yellow area as a notice. Some of it would be captured in the notice if you use the crosstown as your northern boundary, but not areas as far up as Kennedy.
Okay. Thank you for that clarity.
Are you drawing the boundary based on the contributing structures? Is that what I'm?
I think, one of our boundaries were based on concentrations of structures. Yeah, definitely. I think that when you talk about the integrity of the district, you have a responsibility to try to identify those contributing structures and protect them. I think if we start excluding high concentrations of contributing structures, it's kind of counterintuitive to what, our process is kind of leading us towards. Now, city council can always, within their process, they can refine the boundary if they so choose to, usually by reducing it. Increasing it would most likely trigger a notice requirement, but they do have the ability to modify your recommendation.
Would it be the intention in the yellow area to limit the boundary to the National Register District current boundary? Is that the intention?
I believe my recommendation is to limit the boundary to the Crosstown Expressway and leave out everything north of the Crosstown, north of, essentially that, that barrier as it is.
Right.
If you were to look at these areas independently, I mean, the yellow, if it was left on its own, wouldn't qualify as a local historic district. The green probably, wouldn't make that cut just because the number of structures. Obviously, the purple wouldn't. So, if you look at absorbing that into the district, it doesn't, it's only a 2% difference for if you absorb the green area into the local boundaries, doesn't diminish the integrity, makes it somewhat manageable. I mean, there is a practicality to regulating these areas that I have to also consider. So it makes it somewhat manageable, and that we've already got sort of, approach for regulating Hyde Park in place. We would kind of just expand that somewhat. Getting into north of the interstate would probably increase the amount of opposition that you'll be experiencing during this process, and probably lengthen the entire designation process.
In
So-
the yellow area, are the dark gold buildings the contributing structures?
The shaded
The
structures.
shaded structures?
Yeah, the shaded structures are the contributing structures. The lightly shaded structures are new development that has come in recently. And then you have some just lined structures that are kind of more the inventory that was reflected on the original inventory back in the 80s that still exists, but were non-contributing then and are non-contributing now. So they were either built outside the period of historic significance, or there's some heavily altered structures in this area as well.
Are the buildings that are at that apex where Kennedy and whatever that other street is
Grand Central.
meet, are those presently individual landmarks?
No.
No.
No. I would just like to not allow those buildings to be subject to some kind of future demolition event. If there isn't some way, as you said, that maybe we could have a
Multiple property.
multi-property district up there, I would surely recommend doing that.
You're saying a multi-property landmark?
Multiple property landmark district. I mean, we could do, we could create one for that, or we could add those into an existing one. I think that's sort of a separate initiative, because it gets us,
Right.
going down a different rabbit hole. But I think it's very justified. There's a number of significant buildings. There's a church. There's an office building that's very significant. I mean, I think those are pretty obvious.
Right.
The university controls some of those, and we are sort of involved in staff level oversight of them. However, they're not locally designated.
Okay. Yes.
I also lean toward the staff's recommendation of the green for mainly because the crosstown is definitely a physical barrier and a natural border, but also the properties to the north, they do have commercial zoning or commercial-like zoning, and I think there will be a lot of pushback, and it'll end up losing the baby with the bathwater kind of thing, or certainly extending it. And then, I don't think the purple area is valid at all. If there's a building that should be looked at individually, that's one thing. But I think the density of the buildings in the green is really what sells it and makes it much more valid, and and an easier adoption, so we get a lot of most of what we want, or a lot of what we want, but not everything that we want.
So Dennis, do you need a motion regarding the boundary at this meeting?
I mean, I think that, that I just want a consensus that that's the area that we're gonna notice, for. Like I said, there'll be some areas beyond that, but, we won't be able to go back during that hearing and decide, oh, we're gonna look at the yellow area again.
Okay.
I'll make
Then,
Do you want a
Commissioners,
motion?
may I have a motion for Dennis's use here?
I move that our preferred boundary option is the area in green on the map for consideration, for moving forward with advertising a public hearing for the expansion of the Hyde Park Historic District.
Do we have to be specific in saying that it's limited by the National Historic District on the west and the Crosstown on the north?
I think this map is an exhibit of what we're
Okay.
talking about today. It's fine.
All right.
And then, the preferred date, I believe we want to add into that motion.
Oh, yes, and I'll add to that motion for advertising or a hearing on April 12th, 2022,
At 5:30 PM.
at 5:30 PM.
Great, thank you.
Is there a second to? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Then the motion passes unanimously. And before we move on to the next hearing date, Dennis, is there any update on the Ivor City guidelines?
Yes, we did receive our second draft back over the holidays for the update. We're going through that right now. We'll be bringing that back to you perhaps in March, now that we've decided what's going to happen with this particular item. So you'll be provided that in advance for review.
Okay. Then, knowing that, then our next date and time of meeting is March 15th
No, we're gonna
at
keep.
9 a.m. in these chambers, and we'll see you then. Does anyone have any new business they would like to raise?
I'm sorry,
Right.
one moment. I'm sorry. If we could let me just clarify this.
Okay.
So let me get them.
It is the second Tuesday, that's right.
Perhaps we'll modify it sometime in April, just to leave it up and
You'll just leave it, it's better, it's safe to modify the date.
just to say at a time in April.
Yeah, and then you determine that.
Okay. So we will need to kind of modify something because there may be a conflict with the room that evening. So instead of specifying the 12th, if you could just specify a date in April
In April.
to be determined appropriate by the staff, and we will figure out the availability of the room.
Okay. So, we need to.
Amend my motion, or
So, yeah, reconsideration of the motion.
do we have to vote on the reconsideration, or
Right.
just make the motion?
You'll have to make.
I have to.
Yeah, to amend the date from the 12th, and then you'll have to vote on it.
Right.
I amend my motion to,
Just the month of April.
I'm sorry, to change the date of the proposed hearing from April 12th, 2022 at 5:30 PM to a date to be determined in April
By staff.
At 5:30.
by staff
Mhm.
At 5:30.
at 5:30 PM.
A second, please.
Second.
Second to the amendment, please.
Second to the
All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion, amendment passes.
And we will reach out to you and verify your availability prior to confirming that meeting. Sorry about that. There's a lot of dates flying around.
It's a good thing somebody just walked in that calendar.
I think we just need a motion to close.
Yeah. Did you, Madam Chair, can you close the meeting? Madam Chair, can you close the meeting?
Oh, I'm sorry. The meeting is now adjourned. It is 10:20 a.m.
Thank you.
You're welcome.